Hi, everyone. I do not have a loud voice, but I'm going to pretend to because I don't have a mic. Thank you so much for joining us on Veterans Day. Welcome. I'm very glad to be in community with all of you to celebrate veterans and their service. I'm Rose Carmen Goldberg, and I've been in the veterans law and policy space for just over a decade, which is shocking. As of recently, I am Associate Director at the Deborah L. Rohde Center here at Stanford Law. The Rohde Center engages in a variety of access to justice work, which encompasses the unique access to justice issues that too many veterans face. And I can say from having known U.S. Attorney Ramsey for some time that we're very lucky to have him here with us today on Veterans Day. And extra thank you all for coming out in the first rain in quite a while. I'm just going to very briefly introduce U.S. Attorney Ramsey before giving him the floor. Before he will tell us about his path from military service to the law to running the United States Attorney's Office in the Northern District of California and starting a new Veterans Treatment Court. Ismail Ramsey is the 53rd U.S. Attorney of the Northern District, which spans 15 counties and roughly 9 million people. He oversees investigation and prosecution of both criminal and civil matters. Previously, he was a founding partner of Ramsey and Ehrlicht in Berkeley, California. He also previously served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District, which he now oversees, and as an associate at Kecker, Van Ness, and Peters. He has a JD from Harvard Law School, an MBA from UC Berkeley, and an undergraduate degree from Harvard College. He is also a Berkeley High School graduate, which in my biased opinion as a fellow Berkeley High graduate is a very high distinction. And we are very lucky to have him today, especially it being Veterans Day, because U.S. Attorney Ramsey is a veteran of the United States Air Force. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thanks. All right. Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me? I got to say, what a wonderful turnout on Veterans Day. When Rose asked me to come speak, I thought I was just going to be talking to a small lunch of students, but it's great to see so many folks interested in veterans issues. And thanks to all the veterans in the room. I know student, faculty, administrators. Can I see a show of hands of how many people are veterans? Yeah, so thanks everyone for their service. Today is a special day to give thanks to veterans. As you know, it commemorates the end of World War I and Armistice Day. And, and out of that sort of event and other wars, as Woodrow Wilson said, there were possibilities arose of political freedom and economic concert, as he stated on the very first Armistice Day. So it is a day dedicated to world peace and to honor those of us who've done service to make the fight for freedom and political freedom possible. So honor the service for all veterans to reflect on their dedication and courage. So again, thanks to all of you. I gotta say, I'm somewhat humbled by the request to come speak on Veterans Day. I'm certainly no war hero. As I like to say, during Desert Storm when I was in the Air Force, when people asked me if I was a pilot and flew a plane, I said, no, I flew a desk, which was pretty much it, safely in Montana. But the service did have a huge impact on my life. And so Rose asked me to speak a little bit about my time in the service and the path towards what I'm doing now today as a lawyer. So happy to do that. But definitely I'm going to reserve most of this hour to sort of answer your questions and hopefully talk about a project that my office announced today, which was creating a veterans court to serve some of the veterans who found themselves tied up in the criminal justice system. It is a model that I think has a greater presence in state court, but I've been committed during my time as a U.S. attorney to look to programs for alternatives to incarceration, and it seemed to me that one piece that was missing was a veterans court. And there was a lot that we could do to serve our veterans in that regard. So I'll be talking about that, and then, like I said, a little bit about my service, and then just generally how it's weaved its way through my career, which really is a commitment to public service. And I know with as many veterans as we have here today and others, that's something that I think everyone in this room feels strongly about, and commits to doing that throughout their careers. And I just want to talk about ways that I did that outside of military service. So the first question that Rose asked me was why I decided to go into the Air Force. For me, it was something I thought about when I was pretty young. When I was in high school, I thought about applying to one of the service academies. My brother had gone to the Air Force Academy, and he was a couple years ahead of me, so he was a model. And my father had been in the military, and he always said it had had a positive impact on his life. But at the same time, he said that the happiest day of his life was the day that he graduated from college, and the second happiest day was the day he got out of the Air Force. But even that being said, he still really thought it had turned his life around. He had grown up in the Jim Crow South in North Carolina and had dropped out of school in ninth grade, and had eventually found himself to the Air Force during the Korean War, and folks in the Air Force had convinced him to return to his education, and he ended up being a judge in Alameda County and taught at Berkeley's law school for a decade. So I had a lot of examples very early on of people who had really a positive impact from the military on their own lives, and they were people who had a profound sense of public service, which I had a feeling for initially out of high school. So to this day, I still think everyone should do some sort of service. I'm one of those people who would be fine with some sort of conscription, some sort of mandatory service. It doesn't have to be, to me, it wouldn't have to be the military. You could do the military for a couple of years. It could be the Conservation Corps. It could be the Peace Corps. It could be AmeriCorps. But I think just giving back is an important thing, and I always felt that it should be spread equally throughout society. It shouldn't be one particular socioeconomic class or one particular geographic area that should bear that burden. It seemed to me that it was something that everyone should do. So with those as background, that's kind of what made me decide to go into the military going into college. And so I decided to go into ROTC, and I did that as an undergraduate at Harvard. After I graduated from college and went into the service, it was impactful for me in many ways. I mean, providing sort of discipline for me that comes with the military, satisfying the need for public service, and it got me to meet people from other areas of the country. As Rose said, I'd gone to Berkeley High. There was a particular perspective that the People's Republic of Berkeley has often. I went from there to Cambridge, and Cambridge was pretty similar to Berkeley. But when I left Cambridge, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi, and then I got stationed in Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. And that, for me, was just a completely different experience. It was completely eye-opening, both in terms of just the location, the culture of the place as it differed, and also just seeing people from all different areas of the country who then you're serving with and who you're meeting and learning things from. Some of my best friends became folks who were from Georgia and Tennessee, the Midwest. And that gave me a different perspective on the United States and the country generally, and realized that it wasn't just that bubble that I had seen in Berkeley and Cambridge, and gave me a better appreciation for just for the diversity of the country and where people come from. And like I said, it also made me think even more strongly about, I thought that service should be spread across different socioeconomic groups. When I joined the Air Force in 1989, I don't think there was that many people from Harvard. who were in the service, to be quite frankly. I did ROTC, and there were 5 of us who went into the Air Force. There was maybe 10 who went into the Navy and Marines, and like 2 or 3 who went into the Army when we got commissioned the day before graduation. So it wasn't something that a lot of people did. I think more people do that today, but I thought, why should it be that the folks who are serving, aren't necessarily from Ivy League institutions or Stanford or Berkeley. There were some, but it didn't seem like it was equally spread. And I saw and made real connections with people who, like I said, were from culturally different places, but had the same sort of commitment to public service and doing what's best for the country. It's a form of patriotism. I'm not going to say it's the only patriotism because, I'm someone who would take issue with that. But it definitely is a form of patriotism that should be honored. And to this day, some of those folks who I met when I was in Mississippi, I'm still good friends with. Joe Wassel is a good friend of mine in Washington, D.C., and he was from Georgia. And we ended up stationed together in Korea after I left Montana. But those kind of binds to me were incredibly valuable. Like I said, I flew a desk during most of the time I was in the Air Force. I was what's called a squadron section commander, an administrative officer, and aide to the commander for a security police unit. Did missile security, but for me, mostly I did back office stuff. So it did establish discipline. Just didn't get to sleep in past my 8 o'clock classes. I had to wake up to be on duty, like many of you folks know. And I had to be responsible. I was 21 years old when I went into the Air Force, but I was an officer. There was 350 folks in our squadron. There were 5 officers, and I realized that there were a lot of younger folks or people my age who even looked up to me. And so you needed to make an example and do things the right way. So that was another time for me to mature. And when I left the Air Force, then I went back to grad school and ended up at Harvard Law School. And again, like I said, there weren't, in my first year class at Harvard, and I was class of 96, there weren't a lot of veterans. I feel like now in the law schools there are more veterans. I don't know exactly why that is, but it just feels that way from having taught classes at Berkeley or having met folks here. I think in my law school class at Harvard, out of 550 of us, I think there were 4 veterans. So it's great to see so many here today. But again, felt a connection and started to see the impact that folks who were veterans were having on the legal profession, and they were examples for me to follow. When I came back to the Bay Area to work in my hometown, I was very much interested in criminal law, and I went to look for a law firm that did criminal defense, and at the time, I was told about Kecker and Van Ness, where John Kecker had started a firm. It's now Kecker, Van Ness, and Peters. It's now a lot larger. But back then it was about 25 lawyers. And so to be able to work with someone who had his level of experience as a special prosecutor for Oliver North, and himself was a war hero and had Purple Heart from Vietnam and was a Marine Corps veteran. And so to have him as an example was a great one. So I was able to go work there and work with him. And again, you could see the impact of many of the qualities that I thought I had experienced in the military. I saw in John and saw in others, and saw how useful that could be in the profession generally. It wasn't long before John was telling me that he thought that it's important to have experience in the courtroom if you want to be a criminal defense lawyer. And as I talked to folks about what would be the best way to do that, people talked about being an assistant U.S. attorney, being a prosecutor. I said that I had been interested in being a defense lawyer, but some folks, almost all veterans, convinced me that it was a way to have public service and develop some skills that would be useful to you no matter what area of law or on which side of the bar you were in with respect to criminal defense. So it wasn't long before John introduced me or helped me with another veteran. And so at the time, Bob Mueller was the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California, and he was a Marine Corps veteran as well. And John helped me be introduced into Bob, and I applied to the office and was hired by Bob Mueller to be an assistant U.S. Attorney. So I think what was common amongst both of those individuals was their commitment to public service. Completely opposite sides of practice. John was a federal public defender. He started his own firm. He was committed to defense work in the strongest way. But the connection between him and Bob, who had been pretty much a lifelong prosecutor, a couple of stints in private practice, and was just 100% committed to public service. I just saw the value in that, and that's one of the things that led me to be a federal prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney earlier. And it was something that I found to be very rewarding. You're looking for the most difficult problems in the community, and you're trying to solve them. You're trying to protect people who may have been hurt by people's crimes. They may have been victims of crimes, and you're trying to work for the common good. So this was something that, again, like I said, had gone all the way back to my time in high school, had carried through serving in the military, and then through seeing that lens and that reflection of other veterans who were committed in the same way of public service. It directed me to be a federal prosecutor. It wasn't too long, 5 years later, I was gone, and I was starting a law firm with another assistant U.S. attorney, a Stanford Law grad, a guy named Miles Ehrlich, who graduated here in '92, and we decided to just start a law firm together and do criminal defense. It was during that period, and this is the thing that I would say to the students here, you can always find a way to do public service. It doesn't have to be through the military. It doesn't have to be through working for the government. You can find a way to serve your community. And I think that sat with me through my military time and beyond. And during the time Miles and I had a practice, and that was for 15 years, we always tried to find ways that we could serve the public, whether it was pro bono work, whether it was volunteering for the Criminal Justice Act panel, which is representing indigent clients in the court, whether it was volunteering for court committees. We always did that. We always made sure that one of the two of us was on the CJA panel so that we could represent indigent clients. And then there are things you could do even outside the courtroom. So whether it's teaching, students, doing that. I started a mock trial team in the local high school and did that for 5 years of just coaching, working for kids and trying to give back to the public good. Whether it's volunteering, I volunteered on the police commission in Berkeley and did that for 5 years, and found time outside of your actual practice because sometimes that doesn't necessarily allow directly for public service of sorts, but there are always things that you can do outside of that. And one of the things I also did, one of my old college classmates, Professor John Yu at Berkeley, had started the Veterans Practicum at Berkeley, and I think they were mainly doing administrative and civil stuff, but he did call me and say that they had one case that was going to be in the state court, and would I be willing to supervise a couple of students who were going to be representing that veteran in Superior Court. So I did that, and that was probably the first time that I saw really the need to perhaps have unique services for veterans who were tied up in the criminal justice system. I saw how hard those students worked to try to get a resolution that considered our client's veteran status and his background and some of the challenges that he had faced because of his service. Fortunately, there was a prosecutor who was receptive to those ideas, and we were able to fashion a resolution that I think served that veteran in a way better than if he had not been a veteran and if it had not been known. But I guess that planted the seed in some sense from the practicum about how veterans could be treated differently in court and in a way that could actually address some of the many problems that they face. So I'll fast forward to becoming U.S. Attorney, and it wasn't something that I thought of when I was entering that process, but when I was going through my confirmation hearings, I did realize that they kept mentioning that I was a veteran of the Air Force. Even when my vote in committee came up, Senator Feinstein made a point of saying that just sort of right in my initial introduction. And it wasn't something that I necessarily leaned on, but I realized that when people saw it in my background, it was something that people respected. So for those of you who are veterans and students, it's definitely something that's going to stick with you for the rest of your life, even if it's not something that you're putting out front and center. Even when you think that people are going to be more concerned about your legal skills, practicing in courts, there's still going to be this recognition of you as a veteran. And in retrospect, I think that's appropriate. Veterans should have a special status, and not just on Veterans Day. So when I came into the role as United States Attorney, I was committed to having programs that provided alternatives to traditional incarceration. And there are several courts or programs that we had already. We had CAP, Convictions to Alternatives Program, which is really a drug court, and made sure that our office was fully committed to that, to make sure that all prosecutors were sort of aware of the possibility so that they may recommend it for appropriate defendants, and then work through that entire program. We have LEADS, which is a program for young first-time offenders, for under 28-year-old offenders, first-time offenders, where they can then go through a program for a year where they receive services, hopefully, that can get them back on track. And in exchange for either one of those programs, there's the possibility of getting your case dismissed fully if you successfully complete the year-long program, or having a greatly reduced sentence. We also had reentry court, which was for defendants who were coming back from prison sentences so that they could have a smoother transition back into society and have the support that's necessary to hopefully keep them from recidivism. But what we did not have was a veterans court. And so, like I said, it was something that was in the back of my head. And then I was visiting Santa Rita Jail, which is the county jail that the U.S. Marshals have a contract with to house federal prisoners pre-trial. And I was taking a tour of the Santa Rita Jail with my chief assistant, and I saw that they had different pods. So they had pods for particular inmates, maybe in protective custody. They had the general population pods, and then they had the pods for some individuals who are in gangs who need to be separated from other gangs. But then I got to the very last pod, and they had a veterans pod. They had a pod that if you were a veteran, you were there, you got more privileges, and more importantly, you got access to services. So they had an apprenticeship program where buildings and trades and the local unions would come in and try to develop skills for those inmates so that when their cases were done, they had a chance potentially to have a job. They connected them with the VA so that there were certain services available, including mental health. So coming out of that, I thought, wait a minute, why don't we have a veterans court here in the federal system? This is a state program, but all of our inmates are staying here pre-trial. Why can't we identify them, make sure that they're staying in the veterans pod, and then we could provide those kind of services in court to inmates who are in custody, and we thought, well, we should also be able to do it for inmates who are out of custody, and could we work with building trades, other organizations to try to make that possible. And veterans have unique challenges, mental health issues. So set about trying to expand that access, that aspect of our alternatives to incarceration programs. A couple of other things that we added in the interim, but this was a real focus to see if we could do for veterans both in custody and out of custody. And we reached out to the court, we reached out to the defense bar, and fortunately we were successful. And today we were able to announce the creation of a veterans court for the Northern District of California, which is starting immediately. So. And we have a dedicated federal judge who will oversee the program. So what is the program? The program is essentially a post-plea diversion program. So if someone admits their guilt and they meet the qualifications, they can be admitted into the Veterans Court, and then they will go through a year-long program. It can actually last anywhere from 12 to 24 months, and if they successfully complete it, they can potentially have either their case dismissed completely or they can have a greatly reduced sentence. When I take this job, people sometimes say to me, what do you do as a U.S. attorney? And I say, there's an old saying, don't make a federal case out of it. And so we do all the federal cases. So when you deal with us, you're dealing with a federal case. So the cases that we have tend to all be serious cases. So the prospect of having a full dismissal of your case or greatly reduced sentences of great significance. But there are 4 phases to it. The first one's engagement and assessment, because we want identifying the number of veterans. When we first started to try to set this up, we had 16 veterans who were defendants in our system, and I think right now I was just told we have 12. So we have 12 defendants who are veterans, so we want to engage with them through counsel, and we want to make sure that they're assessed. The pretrial services department of the federal courts will do the initial assessment. They've got skill in this through the other alternatives to incarceration programs, both LEADS and CAP. And then beyond that, we want to have a program of stability and accountability where there's support so that these veterans are stable in their lives and that there's a measure of accountability as they go through programs that can help get them back on the right track. Whether it's mental health services, whether it's housing services, whether it's drug rehabilitation services, whatever it may be, that there's a centralized place where those services can be provided to them to help provide them with some stability in their lives. But at the same time, there has to be accountability. They have to be doing what they're supposed to do. They have to be following their individualized plan. And that's quite frankly where the pretrial services department and the court comes into play. They will be having monthly meetings with the judge who's presiding over their case. So there's an actual federal judge who's overseeing that. And then wellness and community connection as the third phase. We want to make sure that they're doing well and that they're connecting with their community and that they're understanding the impact of any of their offenses. We don't want anyone to do it again. We want to limit recidivism, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they understand what they did and why that was hurtful, why that was wrong, why that impacted victims. And then we want to have the fourth phase, which is the program transition, which is sort of the end where they can then transition hopefully back to being productive members of society again, because we know they all were as veterans. So that's the general concept. It could last from 12 to 24 months. Being admitted into the program is solely at the discretion of the U.S. Attorney's Office. So We do have some basic criteria on what makes one eligible. You have to have done 12 months service in one of the branches and had it be honorable. And you also, or if you were activated as a reservist, as long as you completed that period of activation, even if it's not a full 12 months. And then we've got some disqualifying factors which are fairly narrow, but no sex offenders and no one who committed crimes against minors. But we thought long and hard about whether there should be a per se disqualification for certain violent offenses. But we know many of the challenges that veterans serve, we didn't think that there should be some sort of prophylactic rule that would prohibit that. We understand that as the government, we still will have a final say about who can be admitted into the program, but we thought it was worth giving all the veterans in that situation a full assessment to look at their risk and whether we thought there was a plan that could be appropriate for them, and having more flexibility in that regard was what we thought was best. So this is something, and then finally I'll say, just like CAP, the drug court shows and leads, if we can be successful with alternatives to incarceration, that just helps society in general. It helps with cost. Valerie Stewart here was the regional counsel for the Bureau of Prisons for a lot of years, and she definitely knows how much it costs to incarcerate someone in those kind of services. So if we're able to think about alternatives to this sort of incarceration to help veterans, I think that's a good thing, but it's got to come with accountability and rigor. And we've seen success in some of the other areas, for example, CAP and LEADS, and we think it's worth taking a chance on our veterans to give them an opportunity to succeed in that same way. So folks from all sides of the spectrum have come forward and are ready to work on this, whether it's the judges, whether it's the court personnel, the pretrial services officers, probation officers, the public defenders, and the prosecutors were all on board, and were able to make this happen fairly quickly, much more quickly than other programs. But like I said, for me, it's one of the highest priorities, trying to think about alternatives to incarceration for me as a U.S. attorney. And I'm pleased that the folks working for me, I got to give some shout outs to Jeff Bornstein and George Hageman, who worked sort of tirelessly on this to make it happen. They're the ones who have, but I couldn't be more pleased. And I'll say that George is a Navy veteran himself, so he was particularly motivated. So that's all I got. Happy Veterans Day to everyone. And again, thanks to all the veterans for their service. Like I said, I'm ready for questions. I have some familiar faces in here. I see a few students of mine. I taught a class at Berkeley for a few years, so it's great to see them. And Sanders, I see, who's volunteering in our office as a law clerk, so a Stanford Law student. So that's great. But I see a question in the back, and then we'll come here.
Have you taken a look at the state of California prisons and the success they've enjoyed specifically at Soledad State Prison by housing veterans together? They've had 50% reduction in recidivism compared to all other populations in the state prison. Would you be willing to introduce something like that to the Bureau of Prisons?
Well, the Bureau of Prisons doesn't fall under my purview. It is something I heard about at the veterans lunch at Berkeley earlier. It seems like an interesting program. I mean, there's kind of a little piece of that here in the pretrial detainees, but it seems like it's something that people should consider, particularly if it's been successful. But the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice is sort of separate from the U.S. Attorney wing.
Well, the VA has already got the people that go into the federal prison.
Yes.
I would think that they would help
Yeah. I think,
state system.
yeah, I think anything we can do to help provide services to veterans to help limit recidivism is something that we should be looking seriously at. And that's how we're thinking about it, and that's how we're trying to that's what we're trying to do, at least in my office, at least for now, as long as they'll have me. Which may only be for a couple more months, but we'll see. Yep.
What's the data behind this? Like how many veterans come into the system yearly? How many historically would have qualified or will qualify to get into the court?
Yeah, so we didn't have data sort of readily available on veteran status. It's something that once we asked about, we could find out from pretrial services to tell us that. We're also going to be relying on defense counsel knowing that this program is here to volunteer that information. Once I first asked, which was about, I'd say 6 to 8 months ago, how many veterans we had, and we were able to find that. We discovered we had 16. And that's, it's not a huge number out of the total number of defendants that we have. I think we have close to 1,000 defendants at one time, but still, even a single one to me was too many. And look, we're going to have to see what kind of throughput we get into the program. One, they have to volunteer. Two, you heard the disqualifiers. Three, they've got to have a risk assessment. And these kind of programs only work when folks are want to take advantage of the programs. I mean, that's something we've found from CAP and LEADS. If people don't want to have accountability, the program doesn't work. So we have had 16. We're down to 12. But even with that, we want to start that and to make that available for them. So we'll see. We have 12 veterans. They're going to have to go through a risk assessment to make sure they qualify. But if they didn't meet the disqualifiers of crimes against a minor or sex offenders, then they'd have to go. One, they'd have to be willing to go into the program. Two, they'd have to go under the risk assessment, and then we would decide. But look, we're committed to this program. I know different U.S. attorneys in the past have had different levels of commitment to alternatives to incarceration programs, period. Those are just things that change when you're in a presidentially appointed political position. But so all I can speak for at least is, what I've been committed to. And I've been, committed to LEADS, to first-time offenders. I've been committed to CAP, which is the drug court, and now I'm committed to Veterans Court. Also been committed to other aspects of alternatives to incarceration programs. But those are our numbers. So the numbers aren't huge, but like I said, if we help 12 veterans, then I'm okay with that. Hey, Ben, how are you? Good to see you. You bet.
I'm curious about the process for making these ideas become a reality. Specifically, did you have to get approval from Maine Justice for this type of program? And what's sort of the approval process like? And then relatedly, I know that the veterans treatment courts are a thing in state and local courts, but I'm not sure if it's ever been implemented at another district court. And so I'm curious if you give some commentary on that, and if there's any ideas from other veterans treatment courts that you'd like to implement for this program.
Yeah. So it's a good question, kind of one of the process. One thing I learned when you became U.S. Attorney is after you get confirmed, I met with the Deputy Attorney General, and she said, Izzy, you're in charge of setting policy for your district. There's the Justice Manual, which gives general guidelines. There's some memos that come out of Washington. But as the U.S. Attorney, you were confirmed, and you're the person who's uniquely suited in your district to see how those policies should be shaped. What Northern California and San Francisco and Silicon Valley need is completely different from what, ooh, that's mine, sorry. I tried to turn that thing off too. Sorry. That's completely different from what San Francisco and Silicon Valley may need is completely different from what Alaska needs. or Montana or Hawaii. And so, and then she said, so that's your responsibility. And so I quickly learned that really meant that was our responsibility. If I walked down the streets of the Tenderloin and I saw people dealing drugs on the street, I could say, wait, what can we do to address this problem? And if I changed our guidelines to prosecute those cases and talk to the special agents in charge of the FBI and the DEA and the chief of police, they'd actually start arresting people and we'd start charging them. So there's a little bit of that with Veterans Court. Someone just needs to have the idea or think about it. There was some Justice Department memos which encouraged alternatives to incarceration programs, but not specifically veterans courts. So, it was like I said, there was something in the background because there was a CAP program. There was the practicum at Berkeley, which I had known about a little bit, but just, hey, I should see what the jails are like, and talking to the sheriff, and the sheriff had invited me to come out and to tour Santa Rita. And so, just seeing the veterans pod, it just kind of clicked and started to ask questions with other people. And we had a couple of veterans who were off and running. We didn't need to get approval from Washington as long as we're not violating some policy of the department. That being said, I did sort of ask around and see whether there were other U.S. attorneys who had programs. In Arizona had a veterans court that had been in place for a little bit, but that was really the only other one I heard about. And we had, folks, George Hageman, like I said, he reached out to folks in Arizona and talked to them. I don't know the specifics. And then we also reached out. San Francisco, Judge Biggert has an active veterans court, and so we reached out to him and to his staff to learn what they were doing and whether there were things that we could offer. So that really was the process, and there are some things from those, but a lot of this is building on what pretrial services department can do and the different services that they can connect people with, which is something they're expert in doing because they do this in the other programs. They don't, they do this in CAP, they do this in LEADS, they do this in reentry, and they do this even in non-alternatives to incarceration programs. They do that anytime there's someone pretrial who may be facing a challenge. Maybe there's someone who is not in CAP but still has a drug issue, and so they're trying to help folks with that. They're trying to help folks get jobs. So we have a ready-made department inside the courts as long as we could get the courts to sign on to do that.
I wanted to go back to the career part of your talk. Sounds like you've had a very varied career in public service, private practice, your own firm, somewhat larger firm, and now back at in the public service. I'm sure there's been twists and turns that you didn't expect in that career. I was wondering if you had any advice for people at the outset of their careers of how to navigate what a career path looks like for them.
Yeah, I surely didn't expect to be a U.S. attorney. So this is what I say. I say, don't get caught in the current. That's the thing that I took away from my career. When I went to law school, it was easy to go to a big firm. At least there were, Office of Career Services. There were a lot of firms that were coming and were interviewing, and sometimes it was harder to go find other firms or even think about that. It was just so easy to get a job for the summer, get paid some money, then you're working there for the summer, and then they offer you a job, and I called it the current. And so I always was concerned about not getting caught in the current. I always wanted to be able to swim out of the current because that's not what I really thought I wanted to do. I went to law school to be a criminal defense lawyer. So my first summer, I worked for a big firm, right? And they didn't really have criminal law, and I really did it because it was part of the current, and it was fine. It was first year. My second summer, I went and looked for a firm that did criminal defense. And I went and worked there, But even that didn't feel right. So I did a clerkship. So during my clerkship year, I looked for some other places. And back then, Kecker didn't have a summer program. It wasn't even a place a lot of people knew about. But I was able to at least reach outside of the current a little bit to find a firm that worked for me, that was a little bit smaller and that would let me practice in the way I wanted to. And when I showed up there, I said to the folks at Kecker, hey, I did a criminal defense clinical when I was in law school where I represented clients in Roxbury courts. Could I do something like that here, where I take some period of my pro bono time and represent indigent clients? And fortunately, they were like, yes. And so John Tiger, now Judge Tiger, who was the pro bono coordinator, I went and talked to him, and he was like, great. And we went to the public defender's office, and they gave me some cases. And John was willing to supervise me, and that's how I did my first trial, representing a guy in a DUI case. But I made sure I was out of the current. And then when I went back, then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then later, it was not the usual thing to start your own law firm. Miles and I had, no clients. We got a table, literally a table, and brought in 2 folding chairs and our laptops and put them at both ends of the table and, hooked up the phone. And we told a lot of people that we were starting a firm. We got lucky. The local legal newspaper Recorder wrote an article about it. So a lot of people knew about it. But then we didn't have any clients. People started to call us. We were probably naive, because if we hadn't had anybody pay us within 3 months, we both would have been broke, and we would have been, looking for something else to do. But fortunately, we did get some people to start to pay us, but it was completely out of the current. And that turned out to be the greatest decision I made. For 17 years, we practiced that way and developed a great practice. And I never thought that I would leave that or go back into government. But George Floyd happened. That made me think about things differently, and law enforcement and who was in it. And then then Biden got elected, and then some people started to suggest that, hey, you'd be a really good U.S. attorney. Have you ever thought about it? And I really hadn't, but then I gave it some thought, and then I applied and was selected. But none of those were paths that people would not have expected that. And so I'd just say, just sort of do what follow your heart about what you feel like is going to make you happy and what you're interested in, because being in the current may not make you happy. If it does, great. But it also may not lead to the position you think that it'll lead to. And being out of the current may lead you to positions that you never expected either. So I would say, really think about what makes you happy, what you want to do, and follow that. So for me, that was, trying to help people individually as a defense lawyer, and I always have felt people should be doing something for the common good and doing some sort of public service. And you don't have to find that in the current. You can start a mock trial team at an inner city high school, and that'll be just as rewarding. So that's my little advice. Only stay in the current if you want to be there.
So dovetailing on your administration comment, are you at all concerned about the longevity of Veterans Court if you're no longer personality dependent, or
It's a good question. If I have to leave in a couple of months, we'll see who comes. The last U.S. attorney, presidentially appointed U.S. attorney, was not and he's a good friend of mine. We actually started in the U.S. Attorney's Office together, but he was not as supportive of alternatives to incarceration program like drug court or LEADS, and sort of minimally participated. So I would like to think that Veterans Court is different. and would like to think that, it's not as political, but we'll see. I hope so. It is fully up to the discretion of the U.S. Attorney's Office whether someone's eligible. So I hope that there will be a real assessment of risk and of someone's ability to successfully complete one of these programs. If ever there's a group of people that I think should be, given a second chance, I think it's veterans. We'll see. Yeah. Did you go to CM Russell? Did you go to CM Russell or Great Falls?
I had a question concerning when you're talking about the Veterans Court, it had a lot of similarities between tribal, healing, and wellness courts.
Mm-hmm.
And considering that natives serve at the highest rate per capita, have you had any of the tribes located in the Northern District reach out about potential collaboration to team up, or is it still too early to tell?
I have not had them reach out with respect to collaboration in those courts. I have been to the Yurok tribe and the Hoopa Valley tribe, which are the sort of two largest. Yurok tribe is the largest, and have talked a little bit about those programs. They're a little bit different in the tribal justice realm because of the limitation of what the tribes have to do criminal cases on their own, and they can't, so they have to get the sheriffs. If you're on the Yurok tribe, if you're Hoopa Valley, you have to get the Humboldt sheriff or a Del Norte sheriff, and then us. To answer your question, I haven't. I mean, would consider it, but we're what's called a PL 280 state. I don't know how much you know about this, but the jurisdiction for certain offenses there's jurisdiction that's provided to the state. So in most of we do very few cases that would overlap with tribal justice because they're done by county DAs, and we're kind of pushed to the side. The one exception to that is Hoopa Valley, which petitioned the Bureau of Indian Affairs for concurrent jurisdiction just about 3 or 4 years, and they successfully did that. And so we now have concurrent jurisdiction with them, and we've talked to them about how best we could pursue those kind of cases. But there are some real challenges. One, because of the distance that they are from law enforcement agencies other than their tribal officers, which they have a very small number of. And they're, you may be familiar with this, but, like a 3-hour drive from the sheriffs in Humboldt. So if we got to the point where we were doing more concurrent jurisdiction cases out of Hoopa Valley, it's something that we could consider, but we haven't talked about it yet. It would almost be putting a cart before the horse because we have to figure out a way how we can better support tribes in the criminal justice system just on the concurrent jurisdiction. But all the other tribes would end up with cases in state court, and there would have to be veterans courts in Humboldt and Del Norte County, and I'm not sure whether there are.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the third phase, the wellness community phase. If it's more of an individual who's kind of understanding the impact, or if there's more opportunities for them to work in the community for preventative measures, and would that be community as a whole, or speaking with other veterans in the VA, or what kind of options you have for that?
Yeah, well, it's new, so that's something that I think we're going to need to develop and to work with pretrial services about ways that they can have the best understanding of that. In addition to Veterans Court, and you raise an issue I hadn't really thought about, we also are starting a restorative justice court, which Massachusetts has. And I guess I should think about how those would work together. I haven't before. We've thought about them completely separately, but you're just sort of raising this issue in the context of restorative justice, whether that could be part of the Veterans Court as well to have some of those discussions. So I don't have a good answer to your question just yet. I think some of this is going to be built out. We don't have all the, every detail or all the, all the potential permutations of this established yet, but it's definitely something we'll need to think about. Thanks for your service.
I was curious how the Veterans Court might handle any potential veteran who is a non-citizen, and would they give any consideration to potentially help with prevention of deportation of the veteran?
Yeah, it's a good question on it. And I now this is getting digging deeper into the program. I don't want you to quote me on this, but I think that non-citizens are not eligible. Yeah. Yeah, so, this would be similar to what happens in the CAP program. And so, literally, they are checking in, weekly with pretrial services officers who are overseeing their program. And if that means going to mental health counseling, or that means looking for a job, or that means, staying in a housing situation that may remove them from a problem, there's a plan and specific actions that are supposed to be taken, that they're working weekly with a pretrial services officer to support. And once a month, they are coming in and sitting down with their defense lawyer, the pretrial services officer, the prosecutor, and the judge to report on how those things are going. And if they are going well, great, pat on the back, let's talk about the next step. And all parties get to evaluate how they're going and give input on that. It's up to the judge to decide whether it's been complied with or not. But then moving to the next step, and then if it's not working well, then the judge has the ability to order additional steps that the individual has to take. The court can give more support. The amount of time that someone has to be in the diversion period could be extended. So it may start as 12 months, but then there may be an additional couple of months added, or 6 months, or up to a year, where it's a 24-month point. And to give them an opportunity to succeed. Ultimately, if they just are not able to, well, then they're back into the criminal justice system. They've pled guilty already, and so then they would enter into the sentencing phase of their offense. So they would not get a dismissal if they're on phase one. There's different tiers. So you could be a dismissal phase, or a sentencing with the benefit of having gone through the program. And so you then would wash out of those, so to speak, and you would now be back into the normal criminal justice system. And then you'd be facing a sentence having pled guilty.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. I'm loath to interrupt. I can see there are probably many more questions out there, but I did want to share a little token of appreciation
Thank
for
you.
our large appreciation for
Awesome.
joining us on Veterans Day and sharing about your important new veterans treatment
I
here
love
on the
it.
very day of this launch.
Thank you very much. What's even better about this is this, I happen to know because I got one of these once, is underneath the $20 minimum of gifts that I can accept. So I don't have to donate it to the office. Thank you. Awesome. Great. $19.95. It's perfect.